Okay, well, welcome to week 10. A little bit of a different format this week. I'm going to start off with a PowerPoint presentation called this, and this is entitled the CSS Box Model. So sit back. You don't need to follow along here. We're just going to talk a little bit about what the box model is and why it's useful. Okay, so the CSS box model is just a way of, um, I guess, thinking about HTML elements as they're rendered on the screen by the CSS engine in the browser. So it has a number of component parts, and this box model, potentially every element on the page consists of these parts, and you have control over how they appear and certain other visual properties. So we'll start first of all with the content. So um, most elements have a text node. So they're the purpose of the element is to serve content. So the actual text inside is considered part of that box. So that's the center or the middle of the box. We call that the content. Um, Surrounding and residing, of course, behind the content. So the content is fully immersed inside of something called the padding. So the padding is a space behind and all around the content. We can control how much padding there is on the top, right, bottom, and left. We can control them independently. We can just have padding on the top and set padding on the right, left, and bottom to 0 if we wish, or we can have a bit more padding on the bottom, a little less on the top, and a different value for the left and right if we wish. So the padding can also be colored. So we can also set a background color on an element, and that will be applied throughout the padding portion of the element of the box. We also, when we apply background images, they are kind of painted kind of like wallpaper on the padding portion of the box. So we can place a background image, which will, obviously, just like we can see the yellow rendering inside each of those letter forms, the image will show right behind the text as well. If we have an image, it will cover any background color that we've set. So that is called the padding portion of the box model. Around all of that, we have another piece called the border. And the border can also have a color. We can apply a color to the border, and we can apply a different color if we wish to each of the top, right, bottom, and left. We can also apply a number of different styles. We can have the border can be dashed, dotted, double lined if we wish, and some various other kind of variations. And the border, of course, can be, the width of that border can be controlled independently, or it can be consistent around the element. So the border as well kind of surrounds the padding portion of the box. Now, the last portion of the CSS box model around every HTML element is called a margin. Now, I'm rendering this, or I'm presenting this in blue, in a solid color blue around on your screen, but the margin actually cannot be colored. It's transparent. So you cannot set up a background color on the margin. It simply exists to control any space that we would, white space or empty space around the box, around the element, so that to provide it with a bit of breathing room when it sits next to other elements on the page. Now, the default, the way we size and control these is something called content box. And content box sizing, so this is, we don't need to actually set this in CSS. All elements on your page are sized this way. So we don't need to set this at all. However, so when we control the height, and if the height is set to auto, which is also the default, the height of the content portion of the box will equal basically the height of the font. If it's one line, if it's wraps to 2 lines, then the height will adjust automatically to encapsulate the content. So the height, and we can set that, or we can just leave it height auto, and it will size to the content. The same thing with the width. So the width can either be set to encapsulate the content. By default, width generally on elements in your page, particularly those that are display block, and we'll talk a little bit more about display block this week. If they're display block, the width is actually 100%. So irrespective of how much text is in the content portion of the box model, the width will generally be 100%. It will be as wide as it can be with respect to its containing element. But the width is, again, doesn't extend to the borders or the padding. It simply it defines the width of the content portion. So if we're then to add padding and border width and margin, those things in terms of calculating the actual width of the computed width of that box have to be added onto that width property, which is not particularly intuitive, but it's the way the specification, the CSS rendering specification was written. So at least all the browsers do this. So this is, they all agree, and you can set the width of something and it will render just like this. And if you add padding, it gets added to the outside. So all the browsers are consistent. Now, there is another way to specify a CSS box model sizing, and that's called border box. Now, we won't delve too much into that this week, but you can change it such that the height and width of the box, when you set them, it controls the, you're setting the outside limits of the border property. And so then if you add padding inside that element, it gets it basically compresses the content inside. So the content would have to rewrap if it's height auto or you can kind of imagine how that might work. But this is much less common. But there are some proponents of this method of rendering the box model, because it's a little bit more intuitive. So if you want to use border box sizing, which we won't really get into today, you have to set this on the root element on the HTML or on any element that you want to set. But this does inherit, so you can set this on the HTML or the body element, and then all of the HTML elements will be sized. When you specify the height and width, it will be this way. So those are the different parts of the box model: the content, the padding, the border, and the margin. So this week we'll have a bit of fun playing with those all those different properties and see the different ways we can use them to control certain aspects of the page layout. Hope you enjoyed that, and so look forward to walking through that with you in the lesson files. All right.